Just want to say welcome to all of you, and I'm excited that you're here and honored that we have Glenda Oyang of HSD with us. That was a welcome surprise. And I'm going to just jump in. So for today's agenda, we're going to do some introductions, and both to each other and to social, to sort of our purpose here. We're going to do 2 short videos about complexity. They're very short, but I think they have a lot of value. We're going to do some breakouts, and we might have just a couple. We're going to review the CDE model, which we talked about last time. We're going to talk briefly about constraints relative to the CDE model. We're going to introduce the difference matrix, and then we're going to do breakouts again and let you talk about what you see in the what you want to do with the difference matrix, and then we'll do a brief review and feedback. Okay. So first, we're going to do this. First, sorry. So first, I wanted to. I know I always jump in. This is my way. I just jump in and start talking, and I'm working on framing things better. But so I want to start sort of framing what I think social system mapping is about, because it's easy to see all of this stuff moving around on a screen and think it's about the technology. And so just to ground us in what we're trying to do with social system mapping is, so for me, social system mapping is about systemic transformation. So it's about supporting the shift that I see underway in lots of places, from systems of dominance and extraction and exploitation to systems of connection and reverence and regeneration. So it's not about geeking out over big data or AI or just like some purely abstract fascination with the powers of data visualization. And it's not an end in itself. It's a part of a path toward making a world where all beings are sovereign and thriving. So networks, we know, are key to this shift from systems of dominance to systems of connection. But I believe that also key to this shift is understanding how complex adaptive systems change. Because without that systemic awareness, we just spend way more time and energy than we need to, sort of flailing around and creating unintended consequences, and often focusing and putting a whole lot of energy into the wrong things, the things that aren't going to help us achieve our goals in the long term. So we believe that social system mapping can enable us to build stronger networks, but we also believe that social system maps are a perfect lens for informing wise action and within the context of change networks, and also for learning about system change and managing in complexity. So we're trying to leverage visual thinking tools and visual language to bring together sort of a justice and equity worldview with a sort of data-driven sciencey worldview in ways that help both of them move their work more fully into that generative system shift that we're all seeking. So whenever I'm talking about social system mapping, whether I'm talking about, how to change a little character in a survey or something, whenever I'm talking about social system mapping, that's what I'm talking about, is how do we bring together this understanding of complexity with a justice and equity worldview to help make the world a better place. And I see we got a few more people joining us. Cindy, do you want to just do a quick mic check? Say good morning.
I haven't combed my hair yet. I can't do a video check, but
that's fine. No worries.
Early.
Your mic works. Mario, do you want to do a quick mic check?
Yes, I could do, and I could do video as well because it's late afternoon here. So my hair is the best it's ever going to be, and that's not very good. I need a haircut.
Thank you.
I'm not as embarrassed by it.
Yeah. And then I haven't got your name hooked up to your.
Sorry. Yeah, my name is Gabby. My internet is very bad. I'm so sorry. That is why I won't use the camera.
No problem. That's fine. Welcome. Just wanted to make sure your mic works so you can communicate when you need to. Great, Gabby. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so I'm gonna have us introduce ourselves as a whole group. You'll do this again in your breakouts. Let me share my, oh, Kara, here we need in the chat a link to the Mentimeter. So Kara's putting a link in the chat, and each of you can click on that link, and hopefully you will see a slide that says, you'll get into Mentimeter, and we'll show you a slide that says today's agenda on it. So can people click on that link, and is everybody, let me know, like, okay. Okay. Cindy, Gabby, let me know when you're in. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next screen, and this is it. Let me know if you can't input things, but I'd like you to go ahead and, thanks Gabby for putting it in the chat. Share in one field your name, pronouns, location, and a network or networks that you're supporting in some way. Or is that top of mind for you right now? And I'm going to share my screen so we can see what people are saying. Yes. So if everybody's good, I'm going to go ahead and go forward. But if I go forward, you won't be able to, it will move the slide forward. So I just want to make sure everybody's done what they want to do and does is good.
I just need one more minute.
Okay.
I'm almost there. Okay.
Yay. Okay. So this is just a wonderful sort of example of a range of, like I said, equity and justice perspectives to more system-y perspectives, and all doing important work, which I'm always excited and honored to be part of. So I'm gonna go to the next page. For this, in order to know who's present and to know sort of what, just for us to open up what our levels of experience are, would like for you to answer the question about how familiar are you with social system mapping? And how many? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So everybody, there's nobody who's totally in the dark, which is great so far. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And this one is about how familiar you are with human systems dynamics, because what we're talking about today is applying the lens of human systems dynamics to social system mapping. And so these are two different fields that we're bringing together in this context. And it's helpful to know people's experience. Okay. And so the dots on the screen, they're actually showing both social system mapping familiarity and human systems dynamics familiarity. So the blue dots are people who have made social system maps. So there's one person here who's both very adept at human systems dynamics and social system mapping. And then we've got some people who are comfortable with social system mapping and are familiar or introduced to HSD. A number of people who just have a rough idea. And then, anyway. So the point here is not to get too analytical. The point is to recognize that we have a range of familiarity with these concepts and with these methods. And so for some of us, it's going to be brand new. And for some of us, some parts of it are going to be very familiar. And how do we have a session that helps both of those ends of the spectrum, of two spectrums, come together and feel like they got something from it. So before we go here, I'm going to just say that, so one of the points I wanted to make is that, if we think back to the framing that I said about what social system mapping is for. So one of the things that we're doing is we're not simply making networks where we gather more and more people who think and see the world just like we do. And so we're all going to just sort of pile on and take one strategy and push it forward. What we're trying to do is connect up people in ways that generate the conditions for transformation and that leverage the dynamics of complex adaptive systems. But what happens when we try to do that, and I see this over and over and over again, is when we try to visualize the information that can help us see our social systems as ecosystems and see beyond our own network horizons. When we do that, it's overwhelming and it's complicated because there's a lot of information. So because of that, I want to just share, and my experience is that we all sort of feel like we need to go away when that happens. We need to stop that overwhelm. And but I'm going to share with you a video. This is Joe Shu, and he's talking about system mapping, not social system mapping. But the essential insight that he's sharing here is exactly the same, and it fits. And this is really brief. So, and Kara just probably put a link to the transcript of this video because his voice gets very soft in places and it's hard to hear him. So you might want to read the video, read along with the video, or just watch it and you'll get the gist of what he's saying anyway, but I wanted to provide you with the transcript. Okay, here we go.
Explain a typical process that we experience when we do a systems mapping process. So we start, this is the complexity. Right? This is the ton. So when we start with a label, and we start mapping it up, this larger system and a relationship, and it gets more and more complex. But on this part about that part, double click up here, double click that. So it gets more and more complex. And there will be a point where this dotted line shows our mental capacity. That is our mindset, that is just too much. I cannot hold that. It's too complex for me. And what our natural tendency is actually is like, let's move back to where we're comfortable, back to our silo thinking. The importance of this process and the collective discipline and cultivation that we want to have is we want to conclude that process. We want to say, let's continue this process. Let's keep on sensing that larger system and complexity. Knowing that once we see the larger role that is relevant to our goal, there will be another process where we can start to distill the core essence in the structure. And the core drivers, the core structures, the levers that we can support. So we will synthesize, distill the core essence back down to where it is comfortable. Then we'll reach the strategy. Anything up here is very different. Even though we all here we have experienced that complexity, the logic, for instance, workup. Okay. So just having this in mind, holding this in our mind as we go through this process, that we will experience a zone of comfortableness, tension. Let's just hold that complexity together, cultivate that discipline, doing that as we go through the release.
Okay, so I'm hoping you could kind of make out his words, but essentially the takeaway for this is that whenever we're talking about complexity, and it's not just creating a system map, it's when we're talking about creating a social system map, when we're talking about learning HSD, when we're talking about learning to understand complex adaptive systems, we will always hit that line where we're like, okay, this is too complicated, I want to stop now. And the point he's trying to make is that if we can discipline ourselves and have the faith that this is not going to, like, you know, break our brains, and just be willing to tolerate the tension and the discomfort in that zone above the dotted line, that what we will end up with is we will be able to distill that complexity down. We will have strategies for that. And there's a big difference. As he says, there's a big difference from ending up here and ending up here. One is going back to our usual ways of doing things and thinking about them. And the other one is having more clarity about how to accomplish our goals. So this is a thing I just always sort of feel like I'm asking all of us, is to do our best to be okay with the discomfort and the not knowing, and that if we stick with it and we learn the distillation, the keys to distilling the complexity, that we will end up in a far better place than we would otherwise. To that same end, I've got another video I want to share with you, which is in this one, it's also brief, but in this one, he actually quickly gives some examples of what does this mean of going into the complexity and being uncomfortable and dealing with the overwhelm, and then strategies. So it's not how to do any of that, but it's just he sort of whips through some examples that I think help us ground the message. So did I share my screen? I did. Okay. I did not. Thank you, Kara. Okay. This one, I think the sound is better. It's not perfect either, but we'll live with it. Okay. It's TED Talk.
You ever feel completely overwhelmed when you're faced with a complex problem? Well, I hope to change that in less than 3 minutes. So I hope to convince you that complex doesn't always equal complicated. So for me, a well-crafted baguette fresh out of the oven is complex, but a curry, onion, green olive, poppy cheese bread is complicated. I'm an ecologist and I study complexity. I love complexity, and I study that in the natural world, the interconnectedness of species. So here's a food web or a map of feeding links between species that live in alpine lakes in the mountains. And this is what happens to that food web when it's stocked with non-native fish that never lived there before. All the grayed out species disappear. Some are actually on the brink of extinction. And lakes with fish have more mosquitoes, even though they eat them. These effects are all unanticipated, and yet we're discovering they're predictable. So I want to share with you a couple key insights about complexity we're learning from studying nature that maybe are applicable to other problems. First is this, the simple power of good visualization tools to help untangle complexity and just encourage you to ask questions you didn't think of before. For example, you could plot the flow of carbon through corporate supply chains in a corporate ecosystem, or the interconnections of habitat patches for endangered species in Yosemite National Park. The next thing is that if you want to predict the effect of one species on another, if you focus on only that link and then you black box the rest, it's actually less predictable than if you step back, consider the entire system, all the species, all the links, and from that place, hone in on the sphere of influence that matters most. And we're discovering with our research that's often very local to the node you care about, within 1 or 2 degrees. So the more you step back, embrace complexity, the better chance you have of finding simple answers, and it's often different than the simple answer that you started with. So let's switch gears and look at a really complex problem, courtesy of the US government. This is a diagram of the US Counter-Insurgency strategy in Afghanistan. It was front page of the New York Times a couple months ago. instantly ridiculed by the media for being so crazy complicated. And the stated goal was to increase popular support for the Afghan government. Clearly a complex problem, but is it complicated? Well, when I saw this in the front page of the Times, I thought, great, finally something I can relate to. You know, I can sink my teeth into this. So let's do it. So here you go, for the first time ever, a world premiere view of this spaghetti diagram as an ordered network. The circled node is the one we're trying to influence, popular support for the government. And so now we can look 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees away from that node and eliminate like 3/4 of the diagram outside that sphere of influence. Within that sphere, most of those nodes are not actionable, like the harshness of the terrain, and a very small minority are actual military actions. Most are nonviolent, and they fall into 2 broad categories: active engagement with ethnic rivalries and religious beliefs, and fair, transparent economic development and provisioning of services. I don't know about this, but this is what I can decipher from this diagram in 24 seconds. When you see a diagram like this, I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to be excited. I want you to be relieved, because simple answers may emerge. We're discovering in nature that simplicity often lies on the other side of complexity. So for any problem, the more you can zoom out and embrace complexity, the better chance you have of zooming in on the simple details that matter most. Thank you.
So I feel like I say that all the time, but clearly I don't say it as well as those guys do. And so I just decide, like, and they have such great examples. And, but that is a thing that I'm often with social system mapping, really trying to help us get to and understand is that bunch of complexity is part of the, like that zooming out and that embracing of the discomfort of having too much information and information overload is part of the process, number one. And number two, he referred to in his Afghanistan map, some tactics, some logics that he used to, you know, he stepped back, he got rid of a bunch of stuff really quickly, and then he could see within, as he says, 24 seconds, what the answer was that map was to helping to address. So that what we have done with social system mapping is we've made a way of gathering all this data and creating the visualization, which, as Eric Berlow pointed out, is the visualization is a huge piece of what helps us understand the complexity. But we're just beginning to figure out what are the logics, what are the strategies that can help us ask the right questions once we've zoomed out and got all that data, and help us, as Joe Shu talks about, help us distill down to the important things to know. And so that's what this sense-making sessions is all about, is helping us learn how to do that. And I have been interested, not like in an academic way, but just in like how to survive in the world way, in systems thinking and complexity for 20 years now. And of all of the ways of addressing it that I have come across, HSD is the most applicable and simple and accessible and adaptable to the situation that I have come across. And over, as I started working with Glenda and doing social system mapping together, started to really realize, oh, HSD is can help us generate those logics and those to generate questions. So that's what this is about. I'm going to have us go ahead and Kara, let's go into breakouts. And I want to just, oh, Mario, you have a question or comment? Or is your hand just up still because it was, I can't, you're muted.
It's on purpose. It's on purpose. I just want to make 2 quick connections. One, in previous sort of work, we used archetypes as people to condense some of the essence of the social and the system dynamics, and that was quite useful. So you create archetypes of the major actors and what their patterns of behavior are, and that's also very quick. In fact, it's very quick and very people remember it very well. And the other thing is that I did theology, And that puts a lot of claim on hermeneutics, understanding ancient texts. So you have to understand different worldviews. So in hermeneutics, it's always understanding the whole in terms of the parts. And so you're going through this cycle. And I can see the same thing. And I think that is why, for me, that is why things become simpler, the more engaged with it, because you always continuously cycling through this. So I'm saying people should not be scared. After a while, it becomes quite comfortable. That's all.
Yeah, thank you for that. It does. When he said in the video, when he said, he's like, oh, fun, something I can sigma. That's my response. I'm like, oh, fun. Okay, so let's, Kara, can you tell me how many breakout rooms you have and how many people are in each? So you've done 3 in this.
We have 2 groups of 3 and a group of 2.
Okay, let's go ahead and, so for our 5-minute breakout, so you've got 5 minutes. And what I'd like you to do is introduce yourselves again with the networks that you're interested in and your experience, so that everybody kind of has a sense of where each other is at. The request is the more experienced people help the less experienced people feel comfortable and okay with being not always having everything make sense in their heads right away. And if you have time to talk about, if you have a social system map that you deal with, what strategies have you used to help others deal with that overwhelm? Or outside of a social system mapping context, what strategies have you used to help you process your own complexity overwhelm? So 5 minutes, let's go ahead and break them out. And you'll get a 30-second warning before the end. Welcome back, everybody. Good to see you. I'm back. And I know you probably had more to say, as usually the case, but you're gonna have even more time together in a little bit. And there's always, of course, more that everybody wants to say. So we always have that tension of cutting you off too soon. It's always a dynamic that happens in these things. I'm sure you're used to that. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen again, and I'm going to review. And I think most of you were here last time, but I'm going to review it anyway. So for me, and this is interesting because I know I actually did my in my master's thesis, I used Glenda's CDE model. This was a very long time ago, before I knew Glenda, but I knew about the model. And so I used that in my master's thesis. And for me, the CDE model, Glenda and I were in a conversation about her social systems map, and she applied that to the map. And when she did, like I hadn't made those connections yet. I had not thought, oh, this is a container. These are the differences and these are the exchanges. Like, duh. But as soon as she said that, it was like, oh yeah, the CDE model is actually, in my mind, the perfect way of entering into a social system map. For Glenda's experience, I'm speaking for you just briefly, Glenda, from what I've heard you say, is that the CDE model is actually in a broader context or in a narrower context, almost too mathematical, almost too abstract. It's like if you do this plus this plus this, then you get X or Y or Z. So Glenda has using less of the CDE model verbiage and more of a pattern logic verbiage. But in this context, I think it's really appropriate. So you'll hear me using the CDE verbiage a lot. So last time we went through the CDE model. I'm just going to review that briefly. So let me back up. The CDE model is are the understanding each of the C and the D and the E helps us understand the conditions, sets the conditions for self-organizing within a complex adaptive system. So these, as we zoom out and we understand what's going on with the C and the D and the E, that helps. This is a step to moving into those logics to help us distill the complexity. And understanding the C and the D and the E help us understand how fast and in what direction a complex adaptive system can change in. So what does a CDE model stand for? This thing here is the container. These shapes here are differences, and then there's exchanges across them. That is really abstract. So what is a container? A container is any condition that holds people together. So the bounding conditions or the glue that keeps enough, in our case, people in enough contact that patterns can emerge. So if we don't have any container, if we're just totally open, we have the whole universe, and we're not going to be generating patterns because we're just, it's too open. So there's a need for an awareness of what's separating this particular system from the rest of the world, from the chaos of beyond the system. And so examples of containers can be people. Sometimes you have like really charismatic leaders or really loving and connective leaders who hold a group together. They can be groups around any kind of projects or identities or any kind of theme. They can be values. So it might be that, you know, we all have this very strong value that we share, and that's what, and that's a container that separates us from outside. They could be perspectives. So the perspective, socioeconomic perspectives, identity perspectives, they can be goals. We're all working on X or Y or Z. They can be physical locations or in any number of other things. So I'm seeing people are putting, Glenda's put some more containers in the chat. And another one that I like to call it is strategies. There are some people will have a resist strategy. Some people will have a reform strategy. Some people will have a reimagination strategy or a recreation strategy. Those are kinds of strategies that also hold people together. So in our last session, we had people, we did a Mentimeter and we made a word cloud of what are containers in change networks. So these containers, let me just say, the CDE model can be applicable to me and my body and how I get through the day. It can be narrowed down, to that level. It can be broader, about like a whole country, a whole government. So the CDE model is very flexible and applicable at all kinds of scales. For our discussions, we're focusing on social system, on change networks and social systems. So for this context, these were the containers that the group last time came up with as important containers that either exist or should exist in social change networks or transformation networks of all kinds. If you are looking at this and see and think of anything else as I go through these, feel free to add them in the chat if you think something is missing for this context of change networks. That's containers. Differences are distinctions across parts of the system. And so when we're talking about differences with the CDE model, we're talking about differences within the container that we're focusing on. So for instance, right now we're focusing on a container of social system mapping and social transformation networks. So the differences within our map or within our network that we're trying to develop are the differences that we're looking at. A thing to note is if we zoom in and if we zoom out, we change the container. As the container gets bigger, the differences then can become subcontainers. So it's not as if we're saying, this label is applicable, is always a container, or it's always a difference. It depends on how zoomed in or out we are. And what we're looking for is what is the way of, what is the way of defining this either as a container or a difference that is most useful to our context? What helps us generate the right questions and figure out how to take the next wise steps? So we don't need to get too bogged down in, say, is this project a container, is this project a difference, or this strategy? Depends on how zoomed in and out you are. And so everything is always contextual, and everything is always a little more fuzzy than we'd prefer. Then will make us comfortable. So differences, so we're talking about differences within our chosen containers, and differences can be things like interests, assets, experience in networks. In this context, we have differences of experience both with social system mapping and experience with HSD. Culture can be a difference, learning styles can be a difference, roles, informal or formal power. Obviously, identities can be differences. There's all kinds of all kinds of differences that we could surface. And the reason differences are really important to understand and to pay attention to is because differences hold the tension in the system. So and where the tensions are is where there's potential for change within that container. So a lot of us tend to sense tension and want to pull away from it because it's uncomfortable. But actually, if we can explore that difference and surface it and have good conversations about it, that's where we have the most potential for changing for transformation. So differences are really important. These are some of the differences that were listed last time around people's social change networks. So things like geography obviously is a difference. Power, there's differences in, there's power differentials, differences in financial capability, in race and age and skills and values, etc. So feel free to, if there's any that are just popping into your head that feel like they're missing from this list, especially in relation to change networks or mapping change networks. One of the things I thought of when I was looking at this word cloud was motivations. So in our context, why people are interested in being in this community of practice, there's different motivations. Some people just want to know about social system mapping. They don't really want to do it. And other people want to do it from wearing different hats, etc. So motivations, another one might be around motivations. What I want to get from the network. Do I want to get emotional support? Do I want to get, political influence? Do I want to get more learning? So if there's any others that pop into your head, feel free to throw them into the chat. And then exchanges. So exchanges are pretty much, the lifeblood of a complex adaptive system. They're what makes anything happen. So they're the flow or the transfer of energy or resources or information, which can include in the context of change networks, things like funding, friendship, swapping skills, trust, bartering, collaborations, relationships, language, connection, etc. So these are the kinds of exchanges last time that people came up with that are relevant in a change network. Trust, support, information, coaching, resources, mentorship, collaboration, relationships. Lots of stuff around relationships and learning and information and teaching and sharing information. Okay, so let's see where we were going to go now. Okay, so that's a refresher of the CDE model. And what I wanted to talk about today was I want to just help us think. So a next level of thinking about the CDE model is as we're looking at our containers or our differences or our exchanges, we can, part of what we're looking for is so if we think about constraints, so constraints are, what restricts, what limits, and all systems have all kinds of restraints. And I was thinking that those of you who have systems backgrounds or understand what who have a concept of what a constraint is, be great if you put that in the chat in the most accessible, user-friendly jargon you can think of. But I know some of you have lots of thoughts about constraints and what is a constraint. For this context, we're simply going to say a constraint means that the container, the differences, and the exchanges can all be too much or too little, too big or too small, too tight, too loose, too many, too few. So just too big, too little is the highest level way of thinking about it. And so what we're looking for as we're thinking about the C and the D and the E is we're trying to find a balance, a healthy balance between the container, the differences, and the exchanges. So for instance, you could have a constrained container where the container is just much too small for the differences and the exchanges that are trying to happen in the system. You could have an unconstrained container where the container is just like way too big for the differences in the exchanges. It's not holding things close together enough to create patterns that you could actually build on or understand well enough to shift. You could have too few differences. So you've got a system that is, there's just a ton of similarity and hardly any difference. And Jim, I'll pause. And did you have your hand up?
I do, but I'm sorry. Finish that stream you're on.
Okay. Okay. And this is just a visual. This is, I understand this is very abstract. I'm just sort of showing that each of these can be too small, or there can be so many differences that the container can't hold it and the exchanges can't support it. And I thought I had exchanges in there, maybe they're in a different order. Anyway, Jim, go ahead.
So the purpose of thinking about that balance is to move a system close to the edge of chaos, or to a point where the self-organizing and emergence possibilities are the greatest, or at the level of emergence that your theory of change says you want to get to. Is that what I'm hearing? So, it's not, you're in basins of stability, nothing's happening. So you pull the container in, you increase the tension, you look at the difference, you increase the exchanges, and stuff starts to happen that wouldn't when you were in stable basins. But not too much, too hot, because nothing then solidifies out. Is that what we're talking about, is adjusting that balance for that purpose?
Well, I think, and I'll ask Glenda if she wants to say a word about it also, but I think that what we're trying to do is we're trying to understand what we're looking at. What is the system like right now? We want to understand the current situation, and then we want to, use these logics to hone in on where is there the greatest potential for our goals. So what's the most useful for what we're trying to accomplish? So sometimes you might be wanting, as Glenda said in the chat, you might be actually wanting to create greater stability because you just got too much chaos going on. And so this is part, so there isn't a rule of thumb for what it is we're trying to do. There's, I think, often what you're talking about, Jim, is what we're trying to do. But just to be clear that it depends on what we're trying to accomplish. Glenda, do you want to add anything to that, since you're the master?
I think you did a great job, Christine. I've got an example that I can give fairly quickly. So I'm working with a guy in Burundi who is trying to be active in the government, and he started a political party to calm down the political rhetoric. So he's using adaptive action and patterns to move away from that edge of chaos and to stabilize so that there's a more rational response in the political world and concern about people's well-being. So you can think about the constraints either to open them up and destabilize, or to tighten them down and restabilize a system. So my friend Oscar in Burundi is doing the second. Does that help?
Yeah, and there was one more thing I wanted. Yeah, so I think what you would like, Jim, as you're talking about like going to the edge of, so that emergent edge of order, I think that you would want to be taking into account how strong are the relationships, how connected are people, how much love and trust is there going on in the system before pushing it to that chaotic edge. I mean, my tendency is always just to push into the chaos because I'm kind of a crazy person, but I've learned that if you want a generative outcome from that, you have to be doing that going to the edge built on tight, stable trusting relationships. Otherwise, you just get destruction and collapse, or you get the end of your community, which I've witnessed lots of. So there. Okay. So just to be really, this is what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of quickly go through. This is Glenda's difference matrix, and just go through the quadrants of it, just to give us a sense of what we're kind of thinking about and looking the kinds of patterns that emerge. And then we'll have you go into breakout groups and discuss this. So this is the difference matrix comparing high and low difference and high and low exchange within the context of a container. So we've got a container that's sort of holding things together, and then we've got all of those possible situations. So we're in high difference, high exchange. This is where, so if Jim, to your question, if the exchanges are trusting and loving and strong, and we've learned how to collaborate, then high difference, high exchange, having more exchanges and more difference can lead to radical change and be generative and then lead to learning. But it can also be dangerous and conflictual and destructive. So that's sort of what we were getting at with that. If it's high difference and low exchange, so we've got a lot of differences and not much conversation going on between them, we'll have the patterns that will emerge from that is just stuckness, reinforcing. It can be it's a bonding thing, so it can really help build those relationships, but it also gets unproductive and boring and exhausting. The high difference, low exchange. So we've got a lot of differences, but they're not talking to each other. I think in the United States, we have gone in the last, decade and last 5 years from a high difference, low exchange situation into a high difference, high exchange situation without enough connectivity. But so this is where we'll be, it might actually force us to start to make some internal changes because we're not focusing outward. We're focusing inward. It's safer and people are holding back, but it's also potentially explosive, as we have seen, and isolating and fearful. So, if we're seeing any of these kinds of patterns in these 4 different quadrants going on, that is a way of helping us understand if we are too high or too low with our differences or our exchanges. And then low difference and low exchange is just, it's like we all understand and trust each other, and it's very stable and comfortable and relaxing, but it can also lead to entropy and to ignorance because we're not getting input from other perspectives, and it can make us irrelevant if we're too low difference, low exchange. So I'm going to pause here. I want to go back to Mentimeter for a moment and just ask everybody, where are you relative to the cognitive load right now? Because this is going to help us define what we're going to do on our breakout sessions. Is everybody able to access the Mentimeter again? I'm seeing, I can't tell.
I lost it again. Oh, I see. There's the link again. Thanks, Kara.
Is everybody else okay? Okay. All right. So, okay. So I had when I was thinking this through, I was thinking that what we would do, oh, it's moving. I see people are just getting started. My initial sort of conceit about this session was that we would take the patterns that were seen from our social system map from last time and apply them to the difference matrix pretending that you're consultants and giving me some advice about how to make this community of practice more generative. But as I was thinking about that, I was thinking that might be just a step too far, depending on where people are with what we've done so far. Maybe they just need to talk about the CDE in relation to the difference matrix and the constraints. So that's what these questions are about. And I think what we should do is just when you get into your small group, there are two sort of approaches that you could take. We're going to have 15 minutes. And one is to apply the difference matrix to our social system map. Kara, can you put a link to the embed link to that in the chat so that people have that? And the other one is simply to explore the difference matrix in relation to your own network or your own organizational experiences. So just explore it writ large and not try to force your head into our particular map. So those are the two options, and I would just ask the more experienced members of the breakout groups to discuss with the others where they want to land. If they prefer to just talk about it in the more related to their own experience, or if you want to do a quick 15-minute pretend to be a consultant and make some advice based on our map. So is everybody clear? Let me just stop my sharing so I can clear what the first decision in the breakout room is. Okay. Does anybody have any? It'll be 15 minutes. So basically, we're just inviting you to talk about the difference matrix in one of those two contexts, whatever works best for your breakout group. And is everybody ready to break out? Okay, Kara, go for it. You're going to be in the same group, so that's why you already got to know each other a little bit so that you can build on that. Welcome back, everybody. I see smiles. Good. So wait, where are we? So let's do, let's just have, I would love to hear the big ahas, the takeaways or thoughts that any of you came away with. And I want to just say a thing before we do that, which is I'm going to, I wasn't planning on saying this, so I have to frame it. Invite us all to make space for everyone and to leave. So I'm not going to call on people. I want you to speak when you feel ready to speak. And I would invite us all to let people, to leave enough space after speaking for those who don't jump in and assert themselves a whole lot to actually find their words and decide that they're ready to talk. So, okay, I'm done. Whoever is ready to say something, go for it, and then give space for everyone else or anyone else who's interested. Yeah.
Okay, I might jump in. It's just because everybody's been slow. I just want to thank Jim and Cindy for a wonderful conversation. I mean, really, it stretched my brain, and it also kind of reprogrammed some of the concepts I had in subtle ways, which I am really glad of. And Jim, the one thing you said about intermediaries, we were talking about people, sort of you've got the, let's say, the development from the bottom up and development from the bottom down, and somewhere the two twain must meet. People with lots of money, people with the beneficiaries. And I was talking about people, and then Holly's kind of weaving network. But what Jim also threw, and I think it was with respect to Cindy's issue, that people's values can also create this kind of be an intermediary where you can find common ground and have a conversation about. So the thing is to have people to have a rich conversation about it. So that's what I got about, and that was way enough, Jim and Cindy. So thanks a lot for that. And yeah.
Thank you. It's wonderful. Anyone else? So one of the things I'm trying to encourage is for us to be comfortable with silence and to let people find what they need, to not be so full of talking and interjecting and commenting that we're making it hard for all of us to sort of hear our own thoughts. So being quiet and seeing if anybody else has anything they want to contribute.
Well, I really appreciated Asna and Brian, and we focused on aging on the landscape. And it was very helpful for me in a variety of ways, just individually, to sit with aging on the difference matrix for a bit. So thank you so much for that, Asna and Brian. And the other thing that came up for us too is playing on the personal and the institutional, being in the same or different places on the difference matrix and the tension that that brings. So thank you very much. It was quite a useful conversation.
Thank you, Glenda. Anyone else?
For me, I think the main thing is trying to get the system to connect back to itself and how to do that to make it stronger. And our conversation was a lot about the people that are so different that they don't want to be connected. So we're talking about how an activity or something else can be that bridge. And in my case, I think it's going to be a video. At least that's what I'm putting my hope in. But activities like gardening and different things can bring people together that don't usually get together. Of course, conversation cafes are always good too. But that somehow that middle ground there is what I need to explore more. And that's what came out for me. Thank you guys for helping me.
Cool. Thanks. Anyone else? I'm going to ask you to wait, Mario.
Both Gabby and I have worked within networks of networks. And so I think that balance is really important. And another picture is, you know, in this really vibrant, growing networks and work across movements of, there's also exhaustion on a personal level that you can look at it in terms of our culture and sort of the extraction of our human resources and just questions of, you know, how to hold that, yeah, and sort of the balance. I think those quadrants were really important for me, that I realized that maybe I was working so strongly on connection and trust that the other quadrants weren't as present. So it was a good picture for me.
Cool. Thanks. Asna.
Yeah, one of the things that I found interesting was the dynamic aspect. So we were looking at aging, but how something can end up in one quadrant and how we can trace back to where it was good and what kind of things need to be changed to bring it back to a more productive and more positive context and situation. I'll bring the example so it become less abstract, and it was gray divorce. And Glenda brought the example of this couple after 50 years of aging, of marriage, sitting in a restaurant and have nothing to talk about. So being in the lower right-hand corner, and what are the things they need to change in order to go back to the upper left-hand, where they were 50 years ago. And so there's something very dynamic here. You can also find how to move from one quadrant to another.
I'm going to have space for one more, and then we're going to move into feedback. Okay. Mario, I'm going to ask you to put it, can you be okay with either putting it in writing or holding it until next time? Great, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's go into the, no, actually, Glenda, I wanted to ask you one thing. I noticed in the chat, you mentioned the lower right, the low exchange low difference. I think you said was thriving, but I think there was a typo. And if you said that was thriving, I was wondering if you could, that was curious to me.
I don't remember saying that in the chat. I think of thriving as being able to move around easily from one to another as the need arises, so that you have the adaptability and flexibility, agility to move from one to another when it's fit for function. So let me see what I would have said about it's being thriving.
It was at 10:58.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go back up to 10:58. I think of my own personal sense of being there is that sometimes low difference and low explain. Oh, no, I didn't mean thriving. I meant something else.
Okay.
But I'm sorry. What I mean is I'm sorry about my typing.
Yeah, that's okay. I like your answer though about thriving being able to move. I think that's really, really powerful, being able to move through the quadrants depending on what's appropriate and necessary. Okay, I'm going to go to, thank you, Glenda.
Sorry about that. Yep.
No big deal. In the Mentimeter, I just for my feedback and to make these better, just if you could go back in the Mentimeter, there's a couple questions. The first one is, what big questions are you left with? And we'll give a brief amount of time to each of these. I think there's 3 for input. Yeah, I think asking the right questions is becoming has become the leverage point in my mind for social system mapping. If we don't ask the right questions, it's not terribly useful.
Can you share your screen?
Oh, sorry,
Christine, so we can see that'd be great.
In my imagination, I already was, but clearly not in reality. Yeah, that posturing behavior is so triggering for me. I have to say, as soon as I see posturing, I'm like checked out. I don't like you anymore. You've lost my trust. Okay, I want to go. I want to honor our time. I'm going to go to the next one. I think if you're putting something in, it will let you finish and then go to the next slide. What did you like about today's session? Just go to the next one. If you're still putting information in, I think it'll take, hopefully. And what did you learn? Sure, that's the last one. Okay, thank you all so much. If you're still inputting information, it will still take, but I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we'll just, knowing that we've gone over, which I apologize for, this is a really great conversation, so I really appreciate it. And we have a little goodbye ritual for those of you who haven't done this before. So I'm going to invite us to, those of us who need to, sorry, the goodbye ritual is simply, we all unmute. I'll count down 3, 2, 1. And when I get to 1, we just all give each other our wishes and our blessings and our love for the rest of the day or evening, wherever you are. And then we'll all jump up as soon as we're ready. So unmute, 3, 2, 1. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much.
So much,
for
Christine.
the
Thanks,
entire
Kara.
time.
Really nice to meet
Everybody.
you all.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.